Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue, and the third video in the Transparent Material series with MODO, Octane, and V-Ray covers absorption. Going to be absorbing some light. Absorption. Pink dragons. All right, back to clear glass. Let's take a look at the last couple of parameters here, and that is transparent color and absorption distance. Both of these parameters have a pretty dramatic effect on the look of your transparent material. So, bringing on my shader tree and bringing on my item properties, here's glass, and there's transparent color, and there's absorption distance. So before I go into this, let's just take a look at transparent color. So let me put in a color here, say a pinkish color, because I like pink. There we go, nice pinky color. And fire up MODO and see what happens. Boom. Come on, MODO. Okay, shocking. It's pink. And we've got a nice little pink reflection down there on the burner. So there's MODO rendering a pink transparent color. And I've basically just tinted this transparent material this color. I'm not getting different colors based on the thickness of this object. So here the arm is kind of, there's a thinner part of the object, or just this little corner of the base here is maybe just a few millimeters versus all the way through the base here. A ray has to travel much farther, a ray of light that is. So absorption distance is going to have a bit of a different effect than just tinting this thing pink. I actually have a higher resolution one here, and you can see it's just sort of tinted pink. You can see some refraction going on in there and some reflections, but I'm not really getting a different pink based on the thickness of the actual object. In order to do that, we have to deal with the absorption of light, not just the color of the transparency. All right, first let's see if we just change the transparency color, how does that translate in V-Ray and Octane? Yes, doing this again. So let's we got MODO paused. Let's fire up V-Ray here, and we see what it does with that pink transparency color. Boom, boom, boom. Here comes the V-Ray. I don't think this is one of those things where I have to use CPU or GPU. I'm just using VRay GPU now. And this is interesting. Doesn't really look like MODO. It looks a lot denser. So it's doing something similar to MODO, but it's a different rendering program, a different algorithm, and that automatic conversion is giving me a much darker color there. Again, I'm not getting absorption based on distance. The different parts of the dragon give me the same sort of pink tint. It's not darker based on the thickness of that geometry at this certain point. So we'll take a look at V-Ray now. Let me stop that and take a look at V-Ray. Pretty dramatic difference there. Let's see what V-Ray, or I'm sorry, Octane. V-Ray is a pretty dramatic difference than MODO. Let's take a look at Octane. Take a look at Octane here. Boom, Octane. Octane looks a lot more like MODO. And so let's take a look at the Octane schematic. You may remember that color correction node that was in there earlier the last time we did this. So let me bring up the shader tree here. And parameters. I'm actually going to pause that. And I'm going to delete the old override there. I think I'll keep that V-Ray. No, I'll delete that V-Ray material as well. And let's take a look at translating this to Octane node. So let's add an Octane override, custom materials, Octane override, there it is. Take a look at the schematic and what is Octane doing. So same sort of specular material. The only thing that changed, instead of white, we have pink. So there's pink, and the Octane color correction is doing a gamma adjustment on that pink. Interesting. So what happens if we bypass this gamma adjustment? What's going to happen? Let me do a render region here, like that. And I'm going to bypass this color correction node with this gamma adjustment on it, this inversion of the 2.2 sRGB gamma. So I'm going to bypass that, no longer there, and fire this up, see what happens. So this is very interesting. When we bypass this color correction node, we get something that looks a lot like V-Ray and a lot less like MODO. So with the color correction node here, it looks like MODO, and without the color correction node, it looks like V-Ray. This tells me that V-Ray's on-the-fly material conversion is just taking that transparency color at its face value and not doing a gamma correction for it, for sRGB space. So you're getting the much darker looking material there, as opposed to the much lighter one that you get in MODO and Octane. So Octane is compensating for that with that color correction node. So if I look at the Octane color correction node here, bump that up and put this in and fire this up, we've got the lighter pink, very similar to MODO. So that's a little downside, I guess, of VRay. You can compensate with that using the VRay specific node, or just adjust your MODO color to compensate if you want to do it with that. It's really an artistic look anyway, but you can see there's a difference between the three. So let's move forward to absorption. Pause this and bring on the properties, shader tree and properties. Let's hide that dragon override. In fact, I'll delete that. I'll just recreate it when we do, whoops. When we delete this, I'll just recreate it. When we do this again, let's look at the properties for glass. Transparent amount here. So we have absorption, we don't have any absorption distance here. We just have the transparent color. Let's see what happens when we start working with absorption distance. I'm going to open up a 3D viewport really quick. There's a 3D viewport. And let's take a look at our dragon geometry. I'm going to actually sort of go to inactive meshes and make them invisible. And I'm also going to hide locators, control 1, hide locators, lights, and work plane. And look at this from above, actually. And then I'm going to, whoops. And then I'm going to bring on my view. Now bring on my ruler tool and see like how thick this guy is. So we're looking at 22 millimeters or so thickness. Actually, that's just for the base. Dragon itself is maybe 16 millimeters. So that gives us an idea of scale. Get this out of the way. And let's take a look at our glass here. And so let me fire this up and let's adjust the absorption distance scale here. So let's say we want everything absorbed at about, see, it's about, what, 16 millimeters thick, so let's say about 20 millimeters. And here, if I sort of hover and use my mouse, you can see we have a different look, right? And the base, where it's kind of thick, we've got a darker pink, and a place like the tail here, where it's really thin, it's almost white. And so this is transparent color in conjunction with an absorption distance. Again, a pretty dramatic effect. If I decrease this absorption distance, it's essentially going to make it even darker because the light's going to absorb faster. If I make this 5 millimeters, you can see it gets even darker. I'll split the difference to 10. And I actually prefer the way this looks because I think I'm getting a better look at my dragon and its features here with a little bit of absorption. If we mix this with some roughness, I think it's going to be looking really cool. But we'll do that last. So there's MODO. I'm just going to time-lapse this. Okay, time-lapse is over, and we see a dramatically different look with absorption distance in conjunction with, let me just actually look at the Octane one, in conjunction with transparent color. So the thicker parts of the material, or the geometry as they are facing the camera here, are darker because it's absorbing more light as the ray travels through it. It's a longer distance for the ray to travel. And you see, versus just sort of tinting it, this pink color over here, this is much more realistic in my opinion. Here's a larger image in MODO's preview. You can see again, really thin areas like the tail here, almost white, almost completely transparent, where the really thick areas in the head and the base and over here on the shoulder are a much deeper pink color because the rays are traveling longer and that light is being absorbed more quickly. Or not necessarily more quickly, but more of it is being absorbed because there's a longer distance to travel inside the geometry. Okay, so will, again, VRay be able to translate that absorption distance into the equivalent VRay material values? And we know already that VRay is not quite getting the gamma correction correct for the transparent color. So we know it's going to be darker, but will it actually see this absorption distance? All right, let me hit go on GPU. Okay, GPU is resolving and does not appear to be getting absorption distance. It seems to be absorbing everything evenly, and of course it's giving us the non-gamma corrected darker pink color. So nothing changed there, so we're going to have to deal with absorption distance on VRay specific materials. There's no conversion process that will do that. Let me just try CPU just to make sure it's not a GPU limitation. So starting up the CPU renderer here. All right, so what has happened here? It looks like VRay CPU does indeed support absorption from the, on-the-fly translation from the MODO material, where VRay GPU did not. But this looks pretty ugly. Why is that? We've got a bunch of black around here, where in MODO we don't have that on the edges like this. And so we're hitting the maximum refraction depth there, it appears, or something is going on and returning a black color, which is not what we want. So we'll have to take a peek into that with the VRay specific material, because when you're doing transparent color and absorption amount, it's translating, it's making those active in the VRay material with on-the-fly translation, but it's not giving us very good results. So we need to dig into that problem with the VRay specific material, which we can do in a second. I am curious to see if Octane will actually translate that absorption, or it will just give us a standard sort of uniform color tinting. Let's fire up Octane. Octane doesn't seem to see absorption either. So let me pause this. Let me just sort of reboot Octane just to make sure we didn't miss anything there. So let's reload everything back into Octane. Sometimes when Octane has things cached, it won't get all the updated values. I don't think this is the case here. I just think it doesn't support absorption, and it does not. So absorption from the MODO material is not translated on the fly in Octane. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a look at Octane first, because neither of these results are very satisfactory. So we're going to have to dig into the specific materials of both VRay and Octane. So let's pause Octane. Let's add an Octane override like we've been doing. Add layer. Custom materials, Octane override. There we go. Let's edit this in the schematic. There we go. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Whoops, let's not the shader tree, the schematic. And move this, sort of push in a little bit. So there's our specular material. There's our gamma color correction right here. There's our pink transparent color. But we're not getting any sort of absorption by distance. And I don't see anything here jumping out at me right off the bat that looks like absorption by distance. But there is this channel here called medium. What is that, you may ask? Well, medium, in this sense, the noun medium is talking about an actual volumetric sort of bit of matter, right? So we're looking at this dragon as an enclosed volume that can either exhibit subsurface scattering behavior or absorption behavior. So we're going to add a medium to this piece of geometry here, this dragon, and give it an absorption quality. Now, it does not do this automatically. You have to do this manually. It may be possible to do this automatically, to connect medium nodes to mimic MODO absorption in a distance in the MODO material, but it doesn't do it right now. So let's take a look at medium. And let's add a new medium. And we have two options, absorption and scattering. We want absorption. We'll get to scattering later in the subsurface scattering video. Let's look at absorption. So I add absorption. And we've got a couple of things here. We've got an absorption node, which gives us a density. And we have an absorption color. Right now it's just gray. So what happens when I'll just do a render region so we can see the difference between medium and no medium. And fire up Octane here. Okay, so there it goes. Looks not so great. In fact, it looks a little bit like that VRay render where the absorption is returning this sort of yucky gray-black color instead of that nice pink transparent color. So it seems to be there's a couple of different values at play here. And if you look, we have a transmission color here. That's our pink color, but we have another color for absorption. So if we go to absorption here. In fact, I'm just going to unhook my transmission color. And we're looking at absorption still. Now I'm just absorbing. I'm going to this gray color. And let's turn this to that pink we had earlier. So this is really interesting. We have the effect that we're looking for. We have an absorption effect where the thinner parts of the model are clear and the thicker parts have this color density applied to it, but it's not the right color. And we don't have a transmission color hooked up at all. In fact, I could hook this back up to transmission maybe and just turn this back to white. And we're going to have that same effect there. So what's happening? Well, we're absorbing pink, right? And so we're getting the inverse of this pink, which is this green, because we're absorbing the pink wavelength, which is giving it, returning to us this green wavelength. It's sort of acting as a complementary color, right? So there's a couple ways to deal with this. One, and in the absorption node, I can actually just click this checkbox, invert absorption. It'll do that for me. Or I can do that manually for the absorption color. If I want pink, I need to absorb green, like that, or sort of pink-ish, maybe a little more cyany, like that. So we're getting closer to what we want. And so if you want to make it easy on yourself and just pick the color, we can go invert absorption and go over here and just dial in that number we had, which I think was 0.2, 0.72, 0.82, if I'm correct, and essentially get what we're looking for. That's very similar to MODO over there. Or we can, and what we may want to do actually with this absorption color, I wonder if we add a color correction node. Now I'm just guessing a little bit, but if I duplicate this node, Control D duplicate, don't need this. I'm gonna go through the node here, input, output, and yeah, so if we add a color correction node compensating for the sRGB gamma inversion of that, we get this color that we're looking for. So perfect, right? There's an absorption node, our color correction node, and our original color node. This is the same color that we used in MODO for transparent color. And then we have one more parameter here, density, right? So I can put my density at 1, not very dense, not really absorbing anything. Density would be similar to the absorption distance in MODO. So in MODO, we actually had millimeters. Here we have a density. There's no unit applied. So the denser it is, the higher density, this is 200, the more it's absorbing. And of course, the lower densities, the less it absorbs. So that's one way to do it. So unhook that, move that out of the way. Looks pretty good. Looks quite MODO-like, actually. I like it. Looks good. And with more refractive bounces, we're losing that sort of dark edge here on the tail. And overall, it's looking pretty good there. So that is Octane. We have solved Octane absorption distance using the medium node and the color using the color correction node and doing a gamma inversion. 1 divided by 2.2 and getting that same color over here. And so I'm going to pause this, or at least close to that same color. So I'm going to pause that. And let's figure out V-Ray. So let's bring on my shader tree again and add a V-Ray material one more time. V-Ray material. Whoops, put it over that Octane override there. And I'm going to fire up V-Ray in CPU mode because I'm not sure GPU mode supports all these features. Again, that is something that V-Ray is, Chaos Group is very aggressive about upgrading the GPU render. They're under no illusions that GPUs are most likely the future of rendering, but not everything is up to parity yet with the GPU renderer. So I am doing this in CPU mode, although it's still pretty fast in CPU mode. So let's take a look at V-Ray. Okay, everybody do this with me. Make this glass. Diffuse color 0. Reflection color white. Reflection glossiness is 1. We'll keep that there. 1.52 refractive amount. And a refraction color of white. Now we've got glass. So let's do a refraction color similar to what we had in MODO. 0.92, 0.72, 0.82. And there it's much darker than it is in MODO. At least remember when MODO, before we added absorption distance. So we have a much darker color here. Now remember, I had max depth set to 8. Reflections and refractions. Okay. Where do we affect absorption distance? Well, it's a little bit interesting. In V-Ray, we have something called absorption distance here under fog. So, how does that work, and why is it called fog? Also, we do have some translucency here, which will do some absorption, but again, that's subsurface scattering, SSS, not purely a glass material. So that's not what we want. We want to deal with fog here. But I've got a fog color. Well, so that's interesting. Is this going to operate like Octane, where I really only need a white transparent color, and I control the color of the glass through absorption by the fog color? So I'm going to turn this back to white. Boom. And we're going to have a white glass here. Fine. So I'm going to turn on fog. Absorption distance 10 millimeters. I think that's actually what I had in MODO here, right? 10 millimeters. Okay, so let's give this a shot in V-Ray. Let's turn on the fog color. We'll use that same MODO pink, 0.92, 0.72, 0.82. And there we go. Wow, look at that. That's basically perfect. That's what we wanted. So again, there's a multiplier here, so I can bump that up if I want to make it absorb into a more dense looking material without having to change the distance. That's pretty cool. It has a multiplier. I'm just going to keep that at 1 and let that go for a second. So that's pretty amazing. That looks a hell of a lot like MODO. So what that tells me is VRay can do what we're doing in MODO very well, very easily, but the built-in VRay on-the-fly translator isn't translating the right properties when it translates that MODO absorption distance and transparent color over to VRay. What it should probably be doing, if absorption distance is active in MODO, if that's non-zero, then what VRay should do is not use this as a transparent color, should bump that back to white like we have here, turn on fog and use the transparent color in MODO for the fog color. Absorption distance seems to be an exact 1-to-1 conversion, 10 millimeters. And there you go. So there's the 3 of them here with absorption distance. Do you want to see if that works with VRay GPU? I want to see if that works with VRay GPU. Let's see if that works with VRay GPU. So let me pause this guy. Let me do a region render. In fact, stop this guy. I'm going to do a region render. And we'll see, we'll turn this to VRay GPU. And this is not doing a conversion with GPU. It's using a VRay material. So let's see if it'll do fog color with VRay GPU. And it does. So VRay GPU is working quite well with the fog color. It was just, again, something with the on-the-fly translation wasn't working with VRay GPU. So when we had absorption on in MODO and turned on and just did a render in VRay GPU, it ignored the absorption and just gave us that pink tint. When we did CPU, it gave us a different looking material that appeared to have some sort of absorption on, but it looked horrible and very blotchy, almost like the refraction depth was really limited. But once we went into the VRay material itself and turned reflection color back to white and turned on absorption distance and fog and gave it a fog color of the same color that we had in MODO, the transparency color, both VRay CPU and VRay GPU worked just fine. Worked great, in fact. So again, so those properties work in VRay GPU, but they aren't working with the on-the-fly translation. So more things to keep in mind. But overall, all 3 renderers are very capable of doing a really cool absorption here and dispersion and roughness. So why don't we do all 3 at once, and we'll call this a wrap since this has been going on for 17 hours now. So let's wrap this up with a nice long look at all of these factors coming into effect here. We've got roughness, we've got absorption, and we have dispersion across MODO, VRay, and Octane. And these are both VRay and Octane are using their own specific materials for these effects. So the fog color over here and the medium over here to simulate absorption, and their own diffraction values and their own roughness and glossiness values, respectively. Looks cool though. That dragon's looking pretty sweet with all that stuff on, I gotta say. Don't know why I made it pink. I guess green would have been more traditional, but hey, I like pink. Or yellowish pink in Octane's case. But I like them all, and that does it for Transparent Materials 17,000 hours later.
Yum, yum!